Today, we're really at figuring out how to get to gigaton scale, which is a lot different than what we were doing before, right? We were at billion-dollar scale before, now we have to get to trillion-dollar scale. And I think that there is a mistake that people make, which is that we could actually just get to trillion-dollar scale through the private markets alone without the government's involvement. And I think that's just not true, right? Whether it's electric vehicles or whether it's waste to value or whether it's transportation related solutions or electricity solutions, government actually has to be working in lockstep.
Today on the Clean Power Hour, scaling the Gigaton Decarbonization economy. How to continue to have the good life that we have while removing hundreds of gigatons of gigatons of CO2 pollution from the economy and from the atmosphere. My guest today is Jigar Shah, founder of SunEdison and Generate Capital, currently serving this great country as the head of the Loan Program Office at the Department of Energy. Welcome to the show, Jigar.
Good to be back.
So nice to see you, and great to see you getting traction at the DOE. It's heady days at the DOE. The DOE is experiencing a renaissance in a way, and I want to touch on that during our interview today. I want to talk about your vision for a clean economy and how you have stuck to that mission and how you have pivoted recently going into a role at the DOE. So why don't we just start there, Jigar? What was it that captivated you about the invitation to go to the DOE?
Well, I think that, as you know, I've always been a big champion of working with different arms of government, whether it's, passing state renewable portfolio standards or federal tax credits or other partnerships. And I think when you think about where we were in the past, we were really about demonstrating that, solar could get cheap enough, or wind could get cheap enough, or lithium-ion batteries could get cheap enough. And today, we're really at figuring out how to get to gigaton scale, which is a lot different than what we were doing before, right? We were at billion-dollar scale before, now we have to get to trillion-dollar scale. And I think that there is a mistake that people make, which is that we could actually just get to trillion-dollar scale through the private markets alone without the government's involvement. And I think that's just not true, right? Whether it's electric vehicles or whether it's waste to value or whether it's transportation related solutions or electricity solutions, government actually has to be working in lockstep. And one of the things that I noticed was that I frankly wasn't working in lockstep with the government. We were making really bold investments out of Generate Capital. And the level of coordination we had done with the government was really low, right? And and I asked myself, well, why was that, right? And I think it's because the trust relationship wasn't there, right? And so I think, my taking this position is really me saying, well, you can't just keep complaining about things. Like, you got to try to make a difference. And I think we have, right? The trust relationship between DOE and the private sector is improving every day and has already improved by leaps and bounds.
Well said. I am on the same page. I do not believe that we can extract 800 gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere without government intervention, just like it took the government to defeat the Nazis in World War II. This is truly a world war effort to transform the economy, first and foremost, to net zero the economy. That's 40 gigatons, excuse me. But there's this thing called CO2 and other greenhouse gases that are invisible, unfortunately, but they're up there. There's a huge waste dump in the sky now. And if we don't get that stuff out of there, it's really going to cause future generations a lot of grief. Humans will survive, but it's going to be a somewhat painful existence. And I choose other, right? I choose to think that we can innovate our way to a future that is just as good, if not even better than the one we have now, but also creating a sustainable economy. So you mentioned trillion-dollar initiatives. Give us a sense of what is the capacity of the Loan Program Office?
Well, I think when you think about the loan programs office and the success that we've had in the past, right? I mean, when you think about the loan that we made to Tesla, as well as Fisker and others, right, that didn't go as well, or the loans that we made to the first 500 megawatt plus solar projects and wind projects. Those loans, right, probably amounted to maybe, roughly, it was less than 500 million to Tesla and, maybe 5 billion or so to the solar and wind industry each. Really sparked an interest from commercial banks as well as institutions that is trillion-dollar scale, right? I mean, since we made those loans in 2009, 2010, the solar and wind industry has committed $1 trillion to wind and solar projects of that type, which was not true in 2009, 2010, 2011, right? And the same thing's true on the EV manufacturing side. Had we not made that loan to Tesla, they probably would have gone bankrupt. But more than that, the revolution in EV manufacturing would have stalled just like it did in the late 90s, under the California EV mandate, right? And so to me, it's not as much about the money that we have. We have about 40 billion or so of leftover authority that we're using to put out the door. But it's more about us strategically finding ways of putting that money out the door that catalyzes trillion-dollar confidence from the private markets.
Yeah, I see it exactly as that, a catalyst. And then in general, we need to wake up. I've been living myself. I am completely guilty of this, of living in a techno-optimist future. But I was in denial of just how grand the scale of this pollution problem is. And it's not our fault. I'm not blaming anybody. I would have done the same thing with the internal combustion engine if I lived 100 years ago as what Henry Ford did. And it's a natural, logical thing. Now we have the wisdom, plenty of hindsight, and we know that we have to change our ways. And markets are extremely powerful phenomenon. Look at what they've done, right? We have created the wealthiest, most powerful country in the world called America. And it's an awesome place. We attract talent from all over the globe. People are dying to get to the United States because it is such a great opportunity. And there is such a strong culture for entrepreneurship. But I'm afraid we've been thinking too small. And I'm glad that Musk has survived with Tesla. He said recently in an interview, he came close to bankruptcy several times with Tesla.
Yep.
And several times with SpaceX. And now we are on the doorstep of a new space age, which is just amazing. And thank you to, that tenacity and the cojones, right? You have to go large. So what do you say to executives who are thinking about ways of scaling their somewhat potentially esoteric technology? Sucking carbon out of the atmosphere isn't sexy necessarily, although you can do good things with it. So what do you say to founders?
Well, I mean, but this goes back to what I was saying before about why I took the job, right? I mean, part of what I say to founders is that there is a model here that works. And not everyone's on the same page as to what the model is or how it works, right? I mean, most of the invention that went into the initial Tesla Model S, they admit was, funded by DOE research in the 90s for the California Air Resources Board EV mandate, right? And so DOE played a big role in making sure those technologies were available, whether it's lithium-ion batteries or whether it was some of the other charge controllers and other components, right? Electric motors, et cetera. Then it does require somebody with indomitable will, right? It does. I mean, I can't say anything other than that. These founders are critical to the American story. And without those founders, we can have all the ingredients in the world sitting on the shelf, but no one's going to make a beautiful cake with it unless you got somebody who's going to toil right through all of those things. But even when they toil, the government has an essential role to play, right? SpaceX was saved by NASA, right? And a critical contract that NASA provided when SpaceX was about to go bankrupt. And Elon Musk admits that freely, right? And the same thing's true with the Loan Programs Office, right? So even along the way, when you've done everything right and you've proven your technology and you've gotten local counties or cities to sign contracts and you've gotten things in place, you still may not get the level of respect that you need from the commercial banks, right? And you can imagine a private equity firm or venture capital firm saying, we're not going to give you $300 million to just build that thing with 100% equity, right? Like, we need you to figure out a way to get debt as well, right? And so it is at that moment that the loan programs office is a partner, right? But, people have to trust that we're going to be a good partner, and people have to be able to be vulnerable, right? A lot of these entrepreneurs, are not conversant in commercial debt, right? They know how to sell iced Eskimos, and they know how to raise equity and raise an A round, a B round, a C round, a D round. But commercial debt is an entirely different process, right? This is a process where the facts matter and people actually read all 4,000 pages of due diligence documents that you submit, and they find all the discrepancies in those documents, and they ask you tough questions about it, not because they hate your idea, but because that is what their job is. That is what earns you very cheap debt capital, right? And a lot of people get the wrong signals from that. They're like, well, I don't want to be subject to that level of scrutiny, right? I think that level of scrutiny means that you don't like me and you don't like my idea and you're being glass half empty. And, I think that dynamic is one that really scares people. And we need to create a safe space for people to be able to say, you know what? This is not my area of expertise. It does scare me, but I trust you, and I trust that you're going to treat me fairly in this office, and that you're not going to be arbitrary and capricious, right? And us putting together that level of trust between the Department of Energy and the federal government and these essential entrepreneurs who really are the engine by which we achieve trillion-dollar scale is critical, because without that, these other 20 plus sectors that we need to scale are just not going to get there.
I'm glad you mentioned sectors. So what are the 3 to 5 sectors that you are really keen to see applications from?
Well, there's certainly a lot. But what I would say is that, the ones that we think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in near term, where we're not seeing as many applications, is really in the plastics recycling, circular economy, waste to value space. That to me, there's a lot of technologies that have frankly gone through proof of concept, but have not gotten to full commercialization there. I mean, and particularly, for instance, like in the anaerobic digester side, we have an extraordinary amount of food waste and, animal manure and other crop residue waste that we could use to convert into renewable natural gas and produce roughly 5% of all the natural gas needs in the U.S. And on top of that, it produces digestate as their waste product, which, fertilizer is in short supply right now. And so having that much digestate would be really useful. And so I think you see a huge opportunity there. The other opportunity that we see is in green cement. There's been a ton of work done on low carbon cement. And, the Department of Transportation put out initial rules that suggest that all the new projects that are going to get money out of the bipartisan infrastructure legislation are going to have some mandates around using some portion of their cement usage will be from green cement. So there's even a demand signal there. But the manufacturing capacity we're not seeing coming through our office yet. And then the last piece of it is really in the e-waste battery recycling space. I mean, the amount of precious metals, rare earths, lithium, et cetera, that's in those batteries, as well as in cell phones and other places, we have not been actively recycling those. A lot of those we were sending to China and letting them actively recycle those. And I think what you're going to find is that as we have this battle for critical minerals, we're going to have to keep a lot of that here, and we're going to have to recycle that here.
Yeah, I noticed that we have a very high recycling rate for car batteries, for example. Lead acid batteries have a recycling rate of upwards, I think, of 98%. And you see really well institutionalized programs. When you buy a new car battery, you have to pay a deposit, which encourages you to bring back the used battery. And it works.
Yep.
Money talks. So we have to do this for all of our electronics that have precious materials in them, including batteries and other precious metals. I think about also how we make stuff and making it to be repurposed It's very hard to repurpose a solar panel, for example, right? Today, you pretty much, if it's broken beyond reparation, you have to grind it up and separate it into all the constituent parts. And you can do that, except it takes a lot of energy. And so if we could innovate ways of making solar panels easier to fix, first and foremost, of course, repurpose, but then recycle all those materials. And that's true of so many other electronics, including smartphones. But, the world is made of computers, and computers make the world go round now. So we have to embrace that. Um, so do you want to say anything else about these sectors? Or, I'd love to hear, what is the sweet spot in terms of the stage of a company, the size, the maturation of the technology that really fits well with the Loan Program Office?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, we clearly want to hear from all companies, no matter whether they're in our sweet spot or not. I mean, there's a place for all companies at Department of Energy, whether it's earlier stage research or the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, which recently got $21.5 million, or other programs, right? So, but for the loan program specifically, we're really talking about people who've raised probably at least $100 million of equity, right? They're in their C and D rounds at this point, or SPAC'd. And, what they're really doing is, putting out their first of a kind plant, right? Which is sort of milestone one on the bridge to bankability. And then, maybe they're building their second through fifth plants, right? So that's really more EPC optimization. Or they're, coming down the learning curve, right? That's the Secretary's Earth Shots and other, programs where they've lots of incremental innovation every step of the way. Or like we have with our virtual power plants that we're doing, we're, getting Wall Street acceptance, right? And so it's loan guarantees to get full Wall Street acceptance. But, I think those are the four areas that, we're getting the most applications in. And they're generally more mature companies that have gotten, these C and D rounds or gone public.
Yeah. So real quick, what are the other programs that you can just rattle off the top of your head that entrepreneurs and innovators need to be aware of? The Loan Program Office is the big kahuna, I think, but what other programs should entrepreneurs be aware
Yeah, I
of?
don't have them all memorized off the top of my head, but I mean, for years, people have used NSF grants, right, for PhD theses, right? So you start there, and then some folks take an SBIR, which is sort of like a research grant, which is, fairly straightforward to get if you've got a good plan. And then you've got, ARPA-E and, and groups like that help you really take a concept that people think will work, but they're not sure it'll work, and they give you a good bit of money to like actually prove that it really works. And then ARPA-E also has like a scale up program where they give up to $10 million to folks to like build their first pilot line or put together some of those things, because that's a missing middle, right? Like a lot of the grant programs you find are much larger or much smaller. That $10 million size is a very difficult number to get. But then a lot of the applied offices at Department of Energy have $1 million and $2 million grant programs for grants for demonstration as well. And then you jump up to the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration, where they've got $21.5 billion for hydrogen and civilian nuclear power plants and the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program and all sorts of other things, right? So you've got that, and then the Loan Programs Office comes in on the back end where you're ready to cross that bridge to bankability.
Right on, right on. And you're famous now for saying deploy, deploy, deploy. We have many of the technologies we need to decarbonize the economy. Wind, solar, battery storage are, my mantra, of course, here on the Clean Power Hour, electrification of everything. But, there's this tension between scaling existing technology and innovating and, iterating and making those technologies more affordable. What are your thoughts about that tension between scaling versus improving?
Yeah, to be clear, right? The secretary has been talking about deploy, deploy, deploy since she's come into office, and she's more recently added this, undersecretary position for infrastructure, and so she really has responded to what Congress has said, which is here's $62 billion, and we now want the Department of Energy in the deployment business, right? The demonstration and deployment business, and so. So she's really done a lot of great work um, to feature that new responsibility from the Department of Energy. I'd say, separately, the tension between innovation and deployment of existing technologies is really just entirely fabricated by people who I think want to divide us, right? I don't think that tension exists within doers, right? I mean, contractors, EPC contractors, developers, they're doing both, right? I mean, I see a ton of solar and wind developers who are building gigawatts of solar and wind, and I also see those same developers figuring out how to add 2-hour battery storage, 4-hour battery storage, 6-hour battery storage to those projects. And some of them more recently have announced huge plans to add hydrogen electrolyzers to those plants. And so I think these developers and the people doing things on the ground are not bothered with the tension. They've embraced it as we do things as the main course of our business, and then we do things that seed the next 5 years of our business. And we're, testing those strategies out now, and we're bringing them forward, right? And some of them are even, jumping the shark and getting into carbon sequestration and storage and carbon removal and other things, because what they're finding is that the main ingredient in all that is low electricity prices, which they know how to accomplish with solar and wind power. So I don't think that tension is real, except for the, sort of the class of people who are trying to create tension between those two things in policy papers and that kind of stuff. I mean, I think that in order to be a successful business person, you have to be constantly disrupting your own business. If you're not constantly disrupting your own business, then you're by definition going to go out of business because other people will outcompete you.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Clean Power Hour or viewing it on YouTube. We do have a great YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, please go to cleanpower.group and hit that YouTube icon and subscribe to our channel. Of course, you can find all of our content on your favorite audio platform as well. So please give us a rating and review. I wanted to let you know that we are partnered with the Midwest Solar Expo this year. Check it out. MidwestSolarExpo.com. You can get a 15% discount with our code, which is CPH15. We will also put that in the show notes, CPH numeral 15. The Midwest Solar Expo is the premier B2B solar and clean energy event in the region. It hosts over 450 clean tech executives from around the country, and it's a lovely event in Minneapolis, June 20th to 22nd. So please check it out. Back to the show. Yeah, amen to that. And, you mentioned green cement. The concrete business is one of the largest, if not the largest, material flow businesses that humanity has invented. It's an amazing material. We create high-rise buildings with the stuff, all kinds of infrastructure, roads, bridges, buildings, etc. And it happens to have a fairly large carbon footprint, so we got to bring that down. What are your thoughts about green cement?
So I think cement is different than steel, right? So there are many ways of cost effectively reducing the carbon footprint of cement, right? And so the technology is not the problem there, right? We have been innovating on low carbon cement for a long time. The problem there is more inertia, right? Getting the existing cement manufacturers to utilize technologies that we invented 20 years ago and start to implement them at scale, right? And that's what I think you're seeing out of the administration from the requirements to use green cement in all these new construction projects, is they're kind of just forcing everybody's hand and saying, it's time for you to start deploying technologies that we've had proven for 20 years, right? And so, and you're starting to see that from the state of California, New York, New Jersey, and others who are starting to pass mandates at their level for these green cement facilities. So I think the first thing to note is that the technologies already exist for green cement. And this is really just about deploying it at scale. And obviously, it's going to get incrementally better with every generation of technologies that you deploy. There'll be, improvements made. On the green steel side, I think the underlying technologies of using hydrogen is something that's well proven. but the actual cost premium to date is real. Right. So whereas in the cement side, it's a pretty easy thing for us to see how you can make green cement for the same cost as regular cement. For the steel side, today, all of the low carbon approaches are a premium to the current status quo. And so I don't have like a magic bullet that I can pull out of our R&D and national labs where I can say, oh yeah, no, it costs more now, but with more scale, it'll just come down in cost and it'll be cheaper through the learning curve. And so we have more R&D and deployment to do on the steel side. But you see major green steel announcements being made here in the United States from Nucor and US Steel and others. And so, I mean, I think that you're starting to see a real recognition from people that we need to go that direction. But there's certainly a lot more necessity for R&D if you're going to reduce the cost premium on the steel side.
Yeah, and you mentioned hydrogen. I do think that hydrogen is a very flexible material. It's one of the most abundant elements in the universe, of course. We have a lot of learning to do there, but what do you see happening with green hydrogen? And then maybe we could talk a little bit about
Sure.
direct air capture. Green hydrogen and direct air capture are the topics that come up the most kind of in my circles of influence as far as like next gen technologies that we really need to scale. So what are your thoughts about those two?
Yeah, so let's start by saying that hydrogen is fully figured out, right? There are no missing issues on hydrogen. It is already a $100 billion a year business around the world. We use hydrogen for lots of things everywhere, particularly in the refinery sector, but also we use 10 million tons a year of hydrogen in the United States for industrial processes, making chemicals, ammonia. There's lots of uses of hydrogen, and everyone knows how to handle hydrogen, right? There's liquid hydrogen trucks. We have hydrogen pipelines that already exist that to transmit hydrogen. We have lots of hydrogen. So this is not a new sector. This is not an unproven sector. It's not even a sector that is misunderstood by Wall Street, right? This is fully understood by Wall Street. What we're talking about is now moving from gray hydrogen, right, which is generally a process of making hydrogen from natural gas, to clean hydrogen, right? Figuring out low carbon ways of making hydrogen. So whether that's using waste heat from a nuclear plant, or whether that's making hydrogen the traditional way, but taking the CO2 from that process and sequestering it into Class 6 wells, or whether that's green hydrogen where you're making hydrogen from clean electrons. There's lots of tech, and even those technologies are over 60, 70 years old, right? So electrolyzer technologies have been used in Norway since World War II, right? And so none of that is new either. What's new is that we finally said, you know what, we're going to scale that manufacturing up, and we're going to get those 6 cumulative doublings and the cost reduction that comes from it, such that we are now getting firm price quotes for clean hydrogen that is less than $4 a kilogram for 2025 delivery. Right. And I think almost everyone I talk to believes that getting to $2 a kilogram for hydrogen by 2030 is going to be straightforward. Right now, the secretary has pushed us to go further and getting to $1 per kilogram by 2030 in the Earthshot. And there are many people that have approaches to getting there. And so, we're going to see how well they can execute on getting there. But I just want to make sure that everyone's clear that what we're talking about is taking the 10 million tons of hydrogen that we're already using today and reducing the carbon footprint of that hydrogen while, solving other issues in the electricity grid, while providing all these other benefits, right? So I'm not worried about hydrogen. There's a lot of super competent people in the hydrogen space. And that's why you're seeing these major hydrogen announcements out of the wind and solar developers, because it's a pretty straightforward leap for everybody, including institutional investors.
Yeah, and we have to remember as we double the adoption of technologies, the price comes down, what, 20%?
It depends on the technology, but that's right. For a manufactured item like electrolyzers, the learning curve is far higher. For an EPC construction, like renewable diesel plants or, things like that that are more like refineries. Those things have, much smaller amount of learning curve benefit.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned electrolyzers. We have a Nell electrolyzer here in Champaign-Urbana that produces green hydrogen from a solar array across the road and then fuels hydrogen fuel cell buses. So it is happening. That is a pilot program. And obviously, we just need to scale that technology. Um, Direct air capture. What, you know, 800 gigatons of carbon is a lot. We do need to create a vacuum cleaner. Like our friends at the Orca Energy project in Iceland
Yeah.
are doing now. That technology is very energy intensive, but what are your thoughts about direct air capture?
I think I think it's sort of on the sexier end of things, but I don't think it's the actual focus of my work, right? My work is focused on carbon removal technologies, right? So carbon sequestration and storage, right? And so when you think about um, what we can do there, there's over 100 million tons of CO2 that gets produced every year that are just from industrial processes like making ethanol or ammonia. Whereas part of that, you get a pure stream of CO2 as a byproduct. Right now, that is fully cost effective to just put that into a pipeline and stick it into a Class 6 well. And we've been doing it for 10 plus years for ADM in Illinois, right? Illinois doesn't even know it, but they are the world leader in carbon removal, right? And so this is fully proven technology. I get the fact that people say, well, look at all this money that was wasted on this project and that project and all these projects that failed. But that was the process of discovery that started in 2009, 2010, right? And now we actually know which technologies work at million ton scale, right? I mean, the plant in Illinois has been sequestering 1 million tons a year for almost 10 years, right? So that's there. Now we have new loan authority to build out the trunk capacity of all the CO2 pipelines in the country. So we can actually now build a network of CO2 pipelines that connect all those ammonia plants and ethanol plants and others so that we can actually get all of that carbon dioxide sequestered, right? Now, you separately are saying, well, we can also pull CO2 out of the air. And we can then take that and then we can either sequester it or you can mineralize it and leave it as chalk or something else on the ground. And then you also have a set of technologies around concentrating CO2, right? So like a coal plant might have 15% CO2 as part of its exhaust, and a natural gas plant might be closer to 6 or 7% as in its exhaust. And then, how do you capture that CO2 and then concentrate it, right, up to 100%, and then put it into a pipeline and get it into a Class 6 well? Those technologies there are approaches that are known, but they're not very cost effective yet today. And so there's development going on around making those more cost effective. But remember, I think that this stuff is on a spectrum, and we're in the early days of this, right? I mean, we need to decarbonize the electricity grid by 2035, but the rest of the economy by 2050. So the investments that we're making now in direct air capture, and you saw that big announcement from Stripe and Meta and Google and others around a $925 million fund to buy the carbon credits from these direct air capture carbon removal technologies. That seeding is needed now so that by 2030, we have established technologies and approaches so that we can get to gigaton scale reductions, right? I mean, the president's national climate strategy has 1.5 gigatons of carbon dioxide removal required in the plan by 2050.
Beautiful. So, in our last few minutes together, what other technologies are under or overappreciated by today's markets?
Well, I mean, I think what I would say is that in general, we have 10,000 engineers, scientists, and experts working on all these things, right? And then we also have a number of people who are trying to figure out obstacles to deployment, right? Local community engagement, as firsthand from the community solar work in Illinois, to to, where you can get these sort of 1+1=3 sort of benefits, right? Where you're solving multiple problems at the same time, like you saw with the monolith materials announcement that we made in December, where you've got a technology that produces clean hydrogen and carbon black as a byproduct, right? That gets used in tires, which even electric vehicles still need. And Russia happens to be the largest exporter of carbon black. So now we can compete with Russia on carbon black there. I think so. To me, I'm less interested in the technologies that we're chasing, although we're chasing many of them, including small modular reactors, where I think we're going to have many small modular reactor announcements here in this country over the next 6 to 9 months, which I think is fantastic, right, for us to lead the world in that technology. I think there's lots of data that shows that you're just not going to be able to cost effectively decarbonize the grid by 2035 without another at least 150 gigawatts of small modular reactors or nuclear power installed in this country. And so when you think about all of these technologies, the question is less about the technologies and more about those entrepreneurs that we were talking about, right? Where are the fearless entrepreneurs that are willing to really bet their livelihoods on the success of bringing those technologies to market? I can point to a lot of technologies that are sitting on DOE shelves that have no future because there's no entrepreneur that's actually pulling it off the shelf and getting them out in the marketplace, right? And so I could beg people as much as I want. And if that entrepreneur doesn't show up, well, it's just going to sit there on the shelf, right? And a lot of those technologies have $5, $10, $20 million a year of sales, right? It's not like people aren't selling them, but they're not going to get to $1 trillion scale without somebody more fierce coming along and representing those technologies. For instance, like when you think about passive home design, right, or net zero homes, we've had net zero homes operating in this country since the 70s. This technology is not new, right? The state of California has just mandated net zero homes for all residential construction. We could do that next week across the country. Right? Like these technologies are not expensive. And especially when you finance them across a 30-year mortgage, they save you money every year. Right. And so can I make all home builders in the country do what's in their best interest and their clients' best interests? No. Right. So there might be some regulation that gets passed at the state level. But I would say that what I'm more focused on is identifying fierce entrepreneurs. And those folks who are really willing to, break a bunch of eggs to get to the point where, these technologies are taken seriously and have a shot. And you're starting to see that, for instance, in the fusion space. I mean, God almighty, last year, would you have predicted that there were going to be companies that raised $1.8 billion for fusion? I mean, it's exciting, the place that we are right now in the area of discovery and now deployment. It's breathtaking to watch.
Well, you heard it here. Ideas are cheap. It is the fearless entrepreneurs who really make ideas happen. And that's what America really needs, is more fearless entrepreneurs. So if you're listening to this, get out there and do it. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. Do it yourself. We have to all take leadership roles. And one final question, Jigar, what do you say to technologists, engineers, analysts who are, busily working away in the private sector, but could also lend their shoulder to the DOE's efforts? What do you say to them to consider coming to work at the DOE?
Well, I think that as we've discussed, we are in a magical moment right now to be able to make an enormous contribution to carbon mitigation and removal and to really make a dent on climate change, right? I mean, when you think about where we are with the number of data points that we're seeing around wildfires and hurricanes and tornadoes and other natural disasters that are occurring, droughts and excess rainfall, weather pattern shifts, right? There are places getting snowfall that have never gotten snowfall before that are ill-equipped to handle it. I mean, we're in a place right now where people need to find within themselves a greater sense of of self-awareness around where they can make the biggest difference. And for some of those people, it's going to be as an entrepreneur. For sure. I don't want you working in the government. You got to be an entrepreneur who's fearless, who's forcing your local mayor to, finally put solar panels on all the roofs and finally replace all the police cars with electric vehicles and finally get school buses to be electric and finally do all the work that people have been promising for years but never actually accomplished. Those are also fearless entrepreneurs and activists locally, and that may be people's best and highest use. But for some people, their best and highest use is thinking systemically across the entire economy about what it would take to really catalyze private sector capital at the $100 billion scale per technology to be able to cross the bridge to bankability and to achieve full market acceptance for each one of these technologies. And if you're one of those people who really has that level of systemic thinking, who can really think through how these government programs, and we have, I think, over 50 new government programs here at the Department of Energy that are coming out of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, including solar recycling. We have money directly, that's dedicated for solar recycling, right? We have money dedicated to, figuring out what to do with brownfields and turn them into more productive uses, right? If you have really that brain power around what a systemic solution might look like, DOE is really the only place, in my opinion, where you can fully utilize that expertise. And so join us. The Secretary has been promoting the Clean Energy Corps, and we're excited. It's energy.gov/careers. Fill out your profile, and we're actively hiring, I think, 600 to 800 positions right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I want our listeners to know that they can find all of this content at the cleanpower.group website, cleanpower.group/podcast. Click on that little YouTube icon, subscribe to the YouTube channel, please. Give us a rating and a review on Apple or Spotify. That helps others find this content, and that's what we all want. We create this content for you, but also for the many people who haven't yet discovered it. So please do us a solid and give us a rating and a review. I want to thank Jigar Shah, head of the Loan Program Office at the DOE, for coming on the show for a third time. Thank you so much, Jigar.
It's such a joy to talk to you, and thank you for all the work that you're doing.
I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage.